Hi everybody, welcome. It's 9 o'clock in the evening, 9:30 actually, and I am extremely excited about bringing you Esty Perman this evening. She is a Chabad shlucha in Kansas and the middle of the country, and she's just an incredible inspiration to so many people, and she uses her platform in such a beautiful way, her handle in such a beautiful way, talking about her life and talking about her fertility struggles. And I'm honored to be able to bring her here and to have her on this channel. So channel, whatever that means. Okay, so I'm just waiting for her to come on. I see that she joined, so let's see if I can grab her. She usually just comes on up. Here she is. Okay. Okay, she is. She's coming in 1 second. I love when technology actually works. Let's see if it's going to work tonight. Here she comes. Ah, and she's here.
Hi.
And she's here. It's working tonight. I'm so excited.
Yay. Can you hear me? I
can
guess
hear
you can.
You're a little pixelated, just to let you know.
Maybe it'll clear up.
Okay, let's try. I'll let you know. I can hear you perfectly, but you're not super clear.
Okay, I guess we'll give it a go and see if it clears up. And if not,
Okay.
maybe I can relocate.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so can anybody just comment for me? And if it's only me seeing Esty that's pixelated, because if all of the rest of you see her perfectly, then we're good to go. And maybe it's just me. I just want to make sure that we're good. And if we need to start again, or if we need to move, anybody, comment. Pixelated. Okay. Here, wait. I think you're actually might be getting a little bit better. Yeah, you're blurry. Actually, I think you're getting a little better. I think you're better now. Okay, let's start.
Yay.
Okay.
Okay.
Esty still, yeah, you're definitely better for me now. So we're gonna start, and you guys will
Okay, maybe we'll check back in a few minutes,
yeah,
and if I
let's do
need
that.
to, I can move
Perfect. Okay.
locations.
Perfect. Okay, so Esty, I mean, look, I could introduce you, but you know, I don't know you as well as you know you. So please tell people who you are.
Okay, so before I start, I just want to say that I'm actually pretty nervous to do this. I really enjoy public speaking, obviously, because this is like a great soapbox and platform, Instagram. But I feel like you've just had so many like professionals in the field, and I don't know. I hope I do you justice. So
Okay, first of all, okay, let's just go back for 5 seconds. Yes, I have had a number of different professionals on, but I've also made it my point to have people who are in the trenches right now, who are struggling or have a story to share, or people who are doing this work. And so and some people are more used to public speaking or talking about their story, and others are less. So I want you to know that I'm incredibly grateful that you accepted my suggestion when I reached out and said, please, will you come on? Because I know based on the responses that I've gotten, and you know based on the responses that you've gotten, that you have a tremendous voice in this community, and you have so beautifully shared pieces of your life that often people don't share. And I if and I'm going to do whatever I can to try to make this easy for you. So this is about you, and this is about your comfort, and you need to tell me, as we've discussed before, if there's something that's off limits and you don't want to talk about it, you will tell me, move on, next topic. Okay.
all right, yeah, I think we'll be fine. Okay.
Okay.
So a little bit about me, because you put me on the spot like that. My name is Esty Perman. I live in Overland Park, Kansas, which is a beautiful but slightly boring place. I have a 5-year-old daughter, so my infertility that I'm dealing with is secondary infertility. And just a little background on my infertility story, if we're going to say it like that. I actually got pregnant with my daughter relatively quickly after we got married, after we started trying. I think it was about 5-6 months. And then after she was born, I had a pretty easy recovery. And then like 5 weeks later, I started hemorrhaging. And being a first time mom, I thought, oh, this is probably normal. You know, like my body's like finishing the process. You know how you like convince yourself. And then I hemorrhaged like one, and it was really scary. As much as I tried to justify it to myself, like I was just, it was a lot of blood. It was scary. I felt shaky. I just didn't know what was going on. But I kind of shoved it aside and said, okay, it's like a one-time thing. And then it happened 2 more times. And by the third time, I was like, okay, this isn't normal. So to make a long story short, I ended up having a D&C for retained products, which is basically where they went back in and they did an ultrasound and they said, oh, it looks like part of, what holds the placenta in your uterus didn't fully retract or didn't fully disintegrate. So they couldn't see exactly what it was, but whatever it was causing my body to think that there was still something in my uterus needing blood support, and it was sending like these gushes of blood that were not needed. So I had a D&C for the retained products at about 5 weeks postpartum, which in and of itself, for anybody who's done a D&C postpartum, is a super traumatic event. I think with all the postpartum hormones, like I was convinced, it was my first actual surgery under anesthesia, and I was convinced that I wasn't going to get up from the table. And like, I made my husband bring my baby to the hospital, which is not where you want to bring a 5-week-old baby, just so I could nurse her like right before. And I was a bit of a mess, but then it was fine. I recovered, no problem. And of course, before all surgeries, they kind of warn you, of all the risks and side effects. But A, I didn't really have a choice. Bleeding was not like an option. And B, what are you going to do? And you don't really kind of think that the risks are going to apply to you. But to make a long story a little shorter, one of the major risks of having a D&C or any uterine surgery or procedure postpartum, immediately postpartum, which is within the first few months, is that your uterus, your cervix is all very tender and you are at a higher risk of scarring. So cervical or uterine scarring is also called Asherman syndrome, and that's something that can happen from C-sections. It can happen by a fluke from one C-section, or it can happen more likely to somebody who's had like multiple D&Cs or multiple C-sections or a D&C right after birth, etc. So I ended up with this cervical scarring, which I'm very lucky that it was only cervical and not uterine, because uterus scarring is a lot harder to take care of. But it took about 2.5 years to figure that out. So for the first 2.5 years, I just, I didn't actually begin cycling for the first 15 months after my daughter was born. That's also a symptom of scarring. And then even once I did, it took till she was 2.5 to figure it out. So I got surgery to remove that, to remove the scarring. So we flew to Boston to take care of that because it's a specialty surgery. And then I thought I was in the clear. So we really thought we were in the clear. This was, kind of a hurdle we didn't expect, but we took care of it. Thank God I only needed one trip to Boston. I have friends who have had to go back 5 or 6 times to clear scarring, and it's really painful, and it's usually done awake because that way it's faster. And I don't know how they keep going back again and again. But we really thought we were in the clear. But about like 9 months later, when I still hadn't gotten pregnant and was obviously not trying to prevent it, we realized that we weren't. And since then, kind of been dealing with mostly unexplained infertility, which means that things are, the numbers are adding up. Everything's adding up, but we're not getting the result that we want. So that's kind of a little bit about me. I started sharing about my infertility journey selfishly just because I wanted everybody to know how badly I wanted another child. But it kind of evolved from there because, just the feedback that I got, not only the feedback of, like supportive feedback for me, but the feedback from other people feeling heard or feeling supported. And from there, I kind of, I got bolder and bolder to share more as time went on. Partially because our infertility is unexplained. I always have this tinge of fear that like the day after I make this long, emotional post, things are going to turn around and I'm going to look like a hypocrite. So it always but as more time has passed, I've obviously kind of surpassed that fear, but unfortunately. So that's kind of that. And I'm just going to touch on, should I say one more thing, Amy, or do you want to jump in?
Please.
Okay.
No,
So one of the questions Amy asked for people to kind of chime in and say, to share what they wanted to hear. And I asked as well on my page. And one of the questions that somebody asked me was, how do I decide what to share and what not to share? Because infertility is obviously, for most people, there are some people going through it, who are deciding that they want to be a single parent and finding a donor, whatever they need. But for most people, it's a couple. And so that, obviously anything that happens between a couple, there's a lot of privacy. You're talking about your marriage, you're talking about your family. And that is a balance that I try really hard to maintain, to kind of toe that line. So somebody asked me, how do I do that? Or what method do I use for myself to kind of keep that balance? So first of all, if I'm going to talk about anything more private, I do run it by my husband, which I think is only fair. This is his story too. And second of all is I try really hard to kind of tap into the emotional aspect or the human aspect that we all share and leave out the details. So, if I was talking about whatever it was, you can either talk about, the fear, the anxiety, the worry, which is something we can all relate to and, whatever we're going through, or you can talk about, what actually happened. Sometimes the details are more juicy and they're funner to hear, but I think at the end of the day, the thing that we all connect to and gain from is, the emotions and that kind of that thread that we all share. So that's what I try to do.
absolutely. Look, first of all, there's so much to say here, but, and you and I, met each other a number of months ago, and we've communicated back and forth, and I knew pieces of your story, but didn't know all of it. So first of all, I just want to say, for everyone who's listening, who I'm sure is experiencing and listening to all of this and feeling the same emotions that I am, I'm so sorry. I mean, to hear, I hear stories, people tell me their experiences all day long. And yet each time when someone shares with me something that's extremely personal, it still touches me in a very deep way, because it brings me also back to that time when I was also suffering. So to know that you were postpartum and having all of these, issues with hemorrhaging, and then the DNC, and then that not being over, and then the scarring, and then like one after another, it's a lot. It's a lot. And I'm just, my heart is going out to you. It's a lot.
Thank you.
Okay. I think, the piece of the deciding what to share and how to share, I think is extremely important. And I love the fact that you sort of couched it in that way, like that you, when you share, you tap into that emotional piece instead of the actual specifics, because that's the universal struggle of what so many people are going through, whether it's infertility or loss or anything else. I mean, I guess my question is, and it's based off like a lot of the comments that people made, is how do you make that decision? Like, when did you come to this decision? Yes, you said it was a selfish move, that you wanted to, do this and open yourself up because you needed the support. But that's not often done in your community and our community. So what was that discussion like with your husband? Like, hey, not only am I going to share this, with, thousands of, followers on Instagram, but it also means that people in our real life are also going to know, and people who we interact with on a daily basis. Because there's a very big difference between sort of the social media anonymity of all of it versus the people that you interface with on a daily basis. So I'm curious about that piece.
So definitely the way I like that first post, I'm a writer. That's kind of the way I express myself. So I actually wrote up a whole post first, and then I showed it to my husband. I said, hey, what do you think about me sharing this? And to his credit, he was very supportive, if taken aback. I definitely have a hard time, and I think a lot of people relate to this. And on this side of the coin, a lot of people on the other side of the coin are surprised to hear it. I have a much harder time sharing the struggles with people who are close to me in my actual life than I do on social media, because there is that screen of anonymity. But more than that, I think there's that degree of separation where you know that the people in your close life are going to be hurting for you. And as much as the people, you know, who are reading or listening and your friends and acquaintances are also hurting for you, it's not as severe, obviously, as your immediate family. So that part is a little uncomfortable for me. I'm not going to lie. It's still a little uncomfortable. But I feel like benefits kind of outweigh, you know, outweigh the, and like, if it's my discomfort, so it's my discomfort. It's not like nothing, you know, nothing bad is happening. It's just kind of, I feel like it's just par for the course.
And how, you know, the people in your life, when they, you know, your friends, your family, your close community, how did they react to when you started to become more public about this?
Okay, yeah, that's what you asked. Sorry.
No. I was asking all of it, so I'm
All
just
of
now
it.
coming
Okay.
back to a piece of it.
How did they react? I think my like, I think people were, well, people in my community, and, you know, and which would be my community in Kansas, who I love, and I see some of them on here. Hi, Melissa. Were, sorry, she's the last one who commented, but everybody's always been very supportive. I think maybe, like you said, people more in the more from community, the more Orthodox traditional community, or my family, were more surprised because this is not something as publicly spoken about. And I think that unintentionally, by me sharing, I think people automatically assume the worst. So like, if I'm sharing about my infertility, it must mean that I have a severe diagnosis and this is going to be a crazy story and a crazy miracle at the end of it. Whereas, and that made me feel a little bit like, you know, kind of a little taken aback. Like, it's not, I don't have a crazy story by any means compared to a lot of other people, you know. This is a story that will hopefully have a happy ending, a very likely happy ending, you know. And I
Yep.
think, God willing, and I think that because I chose to share, people already felt like, you know, took it to the next extreme. Like, oh, if she's sharing, this must be like a big deal. And it's not, you know, I mean, it's a deal. It's a big part of my life, but it's not a big deal. And that's something that I kind of still struggle to get across, that like, you know, I don't have like one of these big stories, you know, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that um, you're right that you know, people, because the sharing in the religious community doesn't happen as frequently as the secular community, let's call it. Um, I hear that a lot, right? People assume that when you do share, there must be something horrible, or there must be something, you know, or like you can't help yourself but share because it's just so bad that you need the support of so many people, and you need, yeah, I hear that. I
And I
hear that.
think it's also something that stops other people from sharing,
Right.
because they feel similarly like, oh, but my story's not, you know, or I still have so many options, or my story, and it shouldn't, because it's, again, going back to that emotions, like whether this is something you go through for, you know, a year or 5 or 10, obviously we were talking about somebody's going to be in pain for many more years if they're going through this for 10 years, but the emotions of that 1 year and that 5 years still count just as much as the emotions of the 10 years.
Right.
So I think that's important too.
Right. Right. I always talk, and you and I have also spoken about this a little bit as well. You know, the there's no one that sort of has the corner on
Monopoly. Yeah.
pain. Monopoly corner, you know, on pain or on grief. Pain is pain is pain. Grief is grief is grief. And 1 year, 5 years, early miscarriage, late miscarriage, stillbirth, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You're allowed to experience your pain. You're allowed to experience what you're experiencing, and you're also allowed to share it if that's what you deem to be important for your own well-being. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. Okay, let me get to a couple of these questions. I'm like shuffling here, looking because I
Yeah,
want
go
to.
for it.
Okay, so in sort of relating to this, someone asked, does it bother you that people know these personal details about your life? I mean, and obviously you're not sharing the most personal details because those are private, but some people would, you know, deem all of this to be private and all of this to be personal. So I mean, does it bother you?
It doesn't bother me because, like you said, like I'm very careful with what I choose to share. So I own that sharing, and I'm obviously comfortable with it if I put it out into the world. What does bother me a little bit is like the drama, which I've spoken about before. Like, you know, I like, and I know that everybody means well, and I'm not saying people should stop, but like with every post, I'll get like, you know, 30 comments and 30 messages of blessings and prayers. And I know that it's
Oh, I lost you for a
all of
second.
that extra drama is a little hard for me to deal with. But you know, regarding the personal details of my life, I don't feel like I've ever given details that I'm not comfortable with somebody else knowing.
Amazing. Amazing. Look, that's, you know, that's the benefit of sharing and sort of owning your story and owning the pieces that you decide to go public with and not, as opposed to, you know, stories just sort of eking out. Like, this is where you have control. So that's exactly right. Amazing. Okay. Let's like switch gears a little bit and do more of the um like the pieces about there were a lot of questions that came in that specifically asked about like what you would want people to know if they were first starting on their journey, or things like you know, what someone new in this community in general, if they're supporting someone, what you would want them to do or what you wouldn't want them to do, like things like the general what you would want someone to know, or talk to yourself, you know, 5 years ago before all of this started, and what would you say?
Okay, so what would I say? It's really hard to go back in time, but I think the first thing I would say is be prepared for a lot of curveballs. I think we like for problems to have easy solutions in life in general, right? Especially our millennial generation. We like for everything to be easy, 1, 2, 3. And I don't mean that badly. I just think it's
No,
just part of living
it's
in
just the facts.
2020. I think it's just
Exactly.
the way our lives work. So I
And
think
even non, I was going to say, even non-millennials expect
right,
things to show
it's
up
really
at their
about kind
doorstep.
of the
Right.
life that we
Yeah.
live, like Amazon Prime.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think it's just a matter of being prepared for a lot of curveballs, a lot of time. That's what the one thing that I think a lot of people starting with infertility aren't aware of or prepared for, that it just takes so much time to get from appointment to appointment to appointment, to book in for different tests. And I'm going to veer off because I'll veer off after. Okay. I have the list of questions here also, and I wanted to address that one. But it just, there's so much like hurry up and wait in infertility. So you can like decide, we're going to meet with this doctor, you know, like you do all your research, you figure out which doctor it is that you want to see, you know, and you call in for an appointment, and they're booking out first patient appointments 3 months from now, you know, and this happens with the best doctors for good reason, because you know, they're good doctors, but there's so much hurry up and wait. And even once you get into that appointment, you're like ready to hit the ground running. I'm going to start medication. I'm going to start tests. It's just a consult. Like you're going to sit in the office and pay a couple $100 and just talk.
At the minimum.
You know, at the minimum, right. And then after that, you're going to book in for 3 or 4 tests, and each test takes time. So I think it's just being prepared. And that's something that 5 years in is still exhausting, like just the amount of time. And I think people don't realize that also, like, wow, it took you 5 years. That means for 5 years, you know, every day you were doing, a lot of that time is just waiting and waiting and waiting, or trying to figure out which doctor to go to. And, you know, and living in America with insurance and financially. So there's a lot of the wait. I think I would also tell people or myself to let yourself feel every emotion. And that leads into another question that somebody asked about how to not feel jealous. And I'm just going to veer off because this was really important for me. And this is something I had to learn, I think, and I actually wrote a post about this once, but I don't mean to plug it, but it was really kind of put this together. But the idea was that when your jealousy isn't coming from a place of jealousy, it's coming from a place of pain. And I think it's so important to acknowledge that. Like, let yourself, you know, feel sad. It's okay to feel sad that, you know, 3 out of 5, you know, sister-in-laws or cousins or best friends are all pregnant. Like it's, of course you should feel sad, you know, like don't block yourself off from feeling that emotion, and give yourself the space and the ability to cope with that emotion. You know, if that means, you know, a little distance, retail therapy, whatever it is, like let yourself feel all the feelings. When you're feeling hopeful, let yourself feel hopeful. When you're feeling, you know, like the world's not going to go on, you know, live with that for a couple of days, and then the world does go on. So you have to figure out a way to get up. But, you know, just like let yourself really kind of live it. Don't try to like push yourself down away from the feelings, I guess. Yeah, squash it. That's a better word.
I was actually writing a post, which I'll put up later, and talking about squashing emotions and just sweeping them under the rug. And it's just, we all know. I mean, the more you squash them, the more you sweep them under the rug, the more you squelch them. There's another word, squelch, squash. You know, it's all the SQU. The more it ends up bubbling up inside, and it comes out at the most inopportune times, and you find yourself with this bitter resentment a lot. And so, you know, that's exactly right. I'm a big, firm believer in feeling those emotions, in living with those emotions, in sitting with those emotions, in dealing with those emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't, then there can be consequences later that are just really not great. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so a big thing about feeling emotions and letting yourself feeling them, big things about talking about what you wish you knew about the hurry up and wait. Any other tips that you think that might help someone, like when they're in the middle of this process? Like, you know, you've been through it now for a very long time, so there's a lot of hurry up and wait, but how do you just get yourself to a point where you're like, okay, here we go again. It's another thing. It's another thing. It's another thing. When you thought like that was the thing that was going to give you the answers, and yet here we go again.
Okay, so first of all, just to backtrack, because I think you asked like if there's anything else you tell yourself, or you kind of like slipped it in. So I'm gonna steal that and go for it. Find an infertility buddy. Find an infertility buddy. I'll say it like a million times. Find somebody else outside of your marriage, outside of your spouse, that you can talk to. And even if you don't want a buddy, find a therapist. But even an infertility buddy does the trick. You need somebody to talk to that can relate to what you're going through. And, you know, that's preferably the same gender as you. I think that husbands and wives have very different ways of coping with infertility. I mean, people in general have a million different ways, but if we were to be very blunt in general, I would say that men and women have very different ways of coping with infertility. And the way that men, in my experience, or I should say a man, you know.
Your husband.
My husband, yes, which I did not ask you permission to say this, but I wrote a post about it once, so we should be okay, copes with our infertility is very pragmatically, very practical. Like, okay, we tried this, it didn't work, let's move on. What are our options? Whereas I might not be ready to be practical. Like, I want to be sad. I don't want to be practical, you know? And for him, me being sad is a drag. Like, that's just, and I mean that, I don't mean that in a bad way at all. He's extremely supportive, and he's supported me through a lot of sad, but he has a limit to how much sad he can handle, just like I have a limit to how much practical, you know, game on I can handle, you know? So I think it's really important to have somebody else that you can, you know, text the little things and, oh, going in to do this again, and like doing that, you know, this was my experience, you know, somebody who gets it, that you don't have to do any explaining. So that's just a little plug. Okay, back to what you were asking. What were you asking? Can you remind me?
Just about, you know, as you're on this journey in the beginning, you sort of have this, you mentioned, you touched on it a little bit, but in the beginning you're like, okay, yes, like we're going to do this and we're going to do this and we're going to do this. But as time has gone on, about how you haven't gotten pregnant yet, and you're not holding the child in your arms yet. And so how do you keep yourself motivated in this journey?
Okay.
That was sort of the crux of the question.
Okay, so I'm going to remember your question now. And just to answer the question that just came up in the comments, I have had I've had a few infertility buddies. My first two infertility buddies who might be watching this, I have no idea, have both, thank God, gotten pregnant and had their babies already. One of them has babies who are almost 2, I think, you know, so like, yes. And it wasn't awkward because you've gone through it together. You're just happy for each other, I think. You know, it might have been more awkward for them than it was for me. That I can't answer to. But I think there's just this level of mutual respect that everybody upholds, and, you know, mutual kind of love and empathy. And I think that I've had this conversation with somebody else going through infertility. I can't remember who it was. That infertility is one area where you're never like jealous of somebody else for getting ahead in, you know, in the infertility world. Like everybody's just so happy for anybody else in the infertility world to kind of like get there. Like it's such an accomplishment. And I think you just feel buoyed up, like you just feel more support, you know. So did our relationship change? Yes, like infertility wise it changed. I can't say that I was as, you know, I went on and I found another infertility buddy, which is fine. I don't think that was a problem, and I'm still in touch with, you know, those friends as well. But that was that. Okay, back to
I want to before you answer
yeah.
the other question, I just want to address that for also 1 second. What I can also say is that having run support groups for those who have primary infertility and secondary infertility together, and also speaking with other people in this community who run support groups for those with either primary or secondary, who then go on to get pregnant. Yes, there are definitely some groups or some, I would say, moderators of groups who very much sort of draw a line in the sand and say, once you are pregnant, please don't come back. It's too triggering. They think it's going to be too difficult for the members of the group, and the moderator also doesn't feel comfortable with it. I personally don't run my groups that way. And I've spoken to many others who also run groups similarly, where it's the emotions are exactly the way you describe them, Esty, where just seeing, like, you know, when we were all doing in-person support groups, for example, but just seeing another person in the room who, you know, went through so much and struggled so like for months or years and years, and is now sitting there with a belly, that is so comforting to so many people. And to be able to weave that into the conversation and be able to have that sort of visual encouragement right there, is very helpful for a lot of people. And they feel exactly what you said. They feel buoyed by it. And in addition to that, you know, just because you get pregnant doesn't mean that all of your worries and anxieties have gone away, and all of that so many people are still struggling with all of the emotions of being infertile and everything that they've gone through, and still need that support, whether it's in a larger group or the individual buddy system. So I just wanted to address that sort of from on high for a moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know that it's definitely an area where there's like very polar opposite opinions.
Correct.
But that's just my personal experience. Okay. How do you, so back to that question that we keep unintentionally evading.
Keep forgetting. The question was, it's a good thing.
Like how to,
yeah. It's a good thing
how to
I'm
move
remembering
on.
it somewhat.
Yeah.
How do you keep getting the chizuk and
to keep going. Okay.
To keep going. Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, I think part of it is that you just don't really have a choice. Like life moves on. And I think this is actually a big kind of like catch-22 I find in infertility, though, that I do struggle with, is some days I'm like, what would happen if I just didn't, you know, like what would happen if we just didn't, you know, go to the next step or didn't do anything and we've taken, first of all, I think almost everybody I know who's going through infertility has taken breaks. I think at a certain point, either physically you have to take a break of a couple of months to let your body like recover, prepare. And sometimes emotionally, like you just have to, sometimes financially, you know, so I think everybody takes breaks. But then when the break is over, you come back to it and you kind of haven't made any progress. Because, you know, nothing has really changed. So I find that a lot with myself, where I'll go through this like cycle, you know, this loop in my mind, like, what if we just do nothing? You know, there's probably a very slim chance that we could just be surprised, you know, but on the other hand, like that can take another 15 years, you know what I mean? Like there's always this cycle of like, what to do. But I think the first thing is to let yourself like feel that pain and mourn those dreams. For me, it was really the hardest parts for me were letting go of the dreams that I had held on to the longest. So the first 3 years of my infertility, I would say, were the hardest, more than the later ones, because I desperately wanted another child close in age to my daughter. And as like those were the months that I was really counting month by month. Like I could have told you, you know, my kids are going to be 14 and a half months apart. They're going to be 18 months apart. They're going to be 27 months apart. Like I knew it, you know, like the back of my hand, what the age difference was going to be. And then once we hit like 3 years, I was like, okay, they're gonna be far apart, you know? So like whether it's 3 years or 3.5 years or 4 years doesn't really make a difference. And then I think that was, I think kind of like those dreams that we have, like that was really hard for me to not really let go of. I didn't let go of it, but to kind of, you know, move on from. Past that, I think, you know, kind of just like feel the pain, and then, you know, give yourself the time, and then when you're ready, you just kind of move on. For me, posting about it really helps. Like this, I had a probably one of my most open posts was like a month ago, where it was just like after a cycle that should have worked, you know, like they should have worked and it didn't work. And that was like, you know, but you know, writing about it just kind of helps me get it all out. And I think everybody just has to find whatever coping mechanism works best for them, I guess.
You know, that's actually that exact sentiment, that exact emotion was the inspiration for the name of this account. I was supposed to have a baby. It was exactly that. The supposed to. I was supposed to. It was supposed to happen. I was pregnant. Now I'm not pregnant anymore. I was supposed to. I wanted to have kids, you know, this many months apart, this many years apart, and it didn't happen. That was the exact emotion that I was thinking about when I thought, this is the name that I want to go with. So yeah, very, you know, I don't know if this is someone that you know or not, but this woman just wrote, "Thank you so much for sharing. This is so meaningful and relatable." This is what all of us are experiencing, all of us. Okay, do you want to talk about Nida?
Sure, we can try. Yeah, I mean, we can start. I feel like it's such a bitch. We can try.
Right.
There's
Totally.
some of these are all such big topics, and I really want to touch on them all. Let's talk about that, and then I also want to talk about the supporting people going through it, because I feel like a lot of people wrote in about that. So obviously, there's a lot of interest in that. Okay, so NIDA, for those who don't know, is in short, basically the mitzvah of family purity. So you know, there's one of the actually pillar mitzvot of Judaism is this mitzvah of family purity, which revolves around a cycle of purity and impurity, kind of revolving around a woman's period or a woman's menstrual cycle. Now, this cycle of purity and impurity has nothing to do with cleanliness. It has nothing. It's a ritual. It's a spiritual thing, and I think that's a big misconception. But NIDA and infertility intertwine incredibly and make things way more difficult because for the 2 weeks, so from the day that a woman's menstrual cycle begins, for a minimum of 5 days plus 7 days, which is 12. So from a minimum of 12 days up to however long her menstrual cycle was plus 7 days, she's considered NIDA. She's in this category of impurity, which again doesn't mean not clean. It just means spiritually or ritually impure, I should say, not spiritually, ritually impure. And the reason that this complicates things is because infertility revolves around menstrual cycle as well. And some procedures that you do with infertility, you can't be in an impure. First of all, trying to think of the best way to word this, but basically you can't, when you're in that place, that those 2 weeks of impurity, of that ritual impurity, when you're in the NIDA state, you can't have intimate relations with your husband. So that's where things get really complicated, because if you're, you know, whether it's somebody who's doing like a timed cycle, which means that they're doing medication, maybe doing some injections, and then just trying at home, if that falls out during the NIDA time, that month is going to, you know, scrap that month and throw it in the garbage, because they'll ovulate, you know, if they ovulate too early sorry, I'm really not being clear here, but at the end of the 2 week, at the end of the NIDA period, that 2 week NIDA period, the woman goes to the mikvah and becomes ritually pure, and then she can resume relations with her husband. That was an important fact to add before. So it's anywhere usually between like 12 to 15 days, you know, in an average cycle. But if, let's say, somebody has a 14-day cycle and they ovulate, or they show that they're going to ovulate on day 12, because if you are going through infertility, you're going to ultrasounds that are showing when you're going to ovulate, then you're going to miss that month, because you're going to ovulate on day 12. But if you can't have any, you know, relations with your husband until day 14, or if you're going to be doing something more invasive like an IUI, an intrauterine insemination, again, that couldn't happen until you were ritually pure, until day 14, day 15. Then that would, then the NIDA itself would be kind of what ruined this month's cycle. On the other hand, I've had personally a cycle where my infertility ruined my family purity cycle. So there's like that interesting flip, because I had a month where I had too many follicles and they wouldn't allow me to have any intercourse because it was not safe, you know, like the octomoms that we read about, like 6 to 8, you know, you don't want to do anything unsafe either. And so I wasn't able to go to mikvah for an extra like week or two until they kind of like resolved on their own. So it's definitely very intertwined. Back to the actual question.
I just want to say one quick thing. There are definitely some rabbis who say that it is okay to have an IUI even if you have not gone to the mikvah yet. So I don't know about within the Lubavitch world, but definitely within the Orthodox sphere, there are a number of rabbis who say that that's totally fine, that you can't be with your husband, but you can have an IUI before you go to the mikvah. So I just wanted to put that out there, and just for people to know.
That's a good, and I wasn't trying to give any halachic just kind of a general understanding for people who don't get what the connection is between the two. But somebody asked about the pros and cons of it. So the cons, I would say, you know, is where it complicates things, complicates your infertility. The pros, I personally find, you know, a million pros in keeping Nida. I feel like, you know, there's all those memes going around now about, you know, when Corona's over, that first hug is going to be so amazing. You know, like everybody can kind of relate to the idea of Nida now because of Corona, where there's a lack of touch, and you crave that touch because, you know, you can't hug your friends. So Nida has a similar benefit in that for 2 weeks of every month, or roughly 2 weeks, you're separating physically for your husband. And for people, you know, there are very many different standards of what that means. For some people, it just means they're not having intimate relations. For some people, it means they're not touching in any way, shape, or form. And then obviously reuniting after that is really meaningful. So I think that's an extra pro in infertility, because infertility itself can make relationships kind of stressful, like marriage relationships. I don't mean, you know, so I think that is just, you know, it's kind of something separate that it's a good thing to have.
So someone also asked, just to further this for a second, like practical examples to get through so much Nida, if you have any thoughts about that, like meaning just for everyone who doesn't understand this, meaning if you have so many days, months where you're not allowed to be with your husband, you know, practical examples or thoughts about how to get through that.
Find something fun that you like to do together that you don't do other times. It can be something like I'm a huge jigsaw puzzle person, so I like jigsaw puzzles. It can be hard. I think it's also okay to acknowledge that it can be hard. Like, it doesn't have to be fun, you know, like that goes back to that feelings thing. Like, it's okay to kind of suffer through it. You don't have to, you know, you don't have to love those 2 weeks. But definitely, because this is something that's a recurring part of your life, whoever, you know, is asking this, I would say it's good to find something fun that you can do within the parameters of Nida during those 2 weeks, whether, you know, going for a walk, I don't know, whatever it is you like to do.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. I think, you know, or for me, it's, you know, I often find that we have our more meaningful conversations during those 2 weeks as opposed to the other time, because we're not connecting in a physical way. So we're connecting in other ways. So you know, there are a lot of like sort of these standard like thoughts about like, oh, like, you know, go have date night during those 2 weeks, go like, you know, do something that only you do during then. Like, I can't run my life that way personally. So but I do find that we find other ways to connect, and some of our deepest, most meaningful conversations are happening at the times when we're not physical with each other. So, I mean, that's just another thought and tip from my perspective. All right, Esty, as we're winding down, let's talk about support and support for other people, support for those who are going through it, how to advise people who want to support those who are going through it, you know, tell me your thoughts about that.
Okay, so first of all, it's always a little challenging to me because obviously every person is different. So I'm going to be coming from my personal perspective. But I do think just from my conversations with people that most of this relates to, to most people. But I think first of all is never give advice. And I think that's something that is drilled again and again and again, but people still don't fully comprehend that, like, especially if you're somebody that's in the infertility world, then maybe, but if you're somebody that's outside the infertility world, or no, well, I mean, it depends on your relationship, I think, with the person. Then it's a friendship, it's not advice. But if you're not in the infertility world at all, even if you are the most well-meaning, like well-intentioned, which I'm sure you are, person, just never ever give advice. Advice makes people feel, just for the other end, advice makes people feel stupid because, oh, you think I couldn't have thought of that on my own. It makes people feel small. It's often not helpful. Often they've already done everything you've advised, or they've chosen not to for whatever reason, for their own personal reasons. If you feel like you have something that you critically believe could help them that they're not aware of, find a different way to get them that information. But don't give them that advice. Find a family member of their, like, it's not, whatever it is, it's never a good idea to give advice. Wait till they ask you for, or they open up to you. That's regarding advice. Just be supportive, I think, like some of my most supportive, like times that I felt the most supportive were when friends would send me like randomly, like, a flower delivery, or we have a store in Kansas that actually makes kosher sushi, and a friend once sent me, ordered kosher sushi, which was so random and unexpected and meant so much. Or like random Amazon deliveries from a friend that just said, thinking of you. Like, I think we forget that those little messages of love mean so much. Also to kind of open up the floor for them and let them come to you if they want to, but not have to. You can say, hey, I feel like we haven't spoken in a while, just wanted to check in, thinking of you, miss you, how are things doing, or what's going on. And when you say what's going on or how are things doing, you open up the floor for them to talk about it if they want to. And if they don't, then they don't want to talk about it. And then you can't ask any more questions because you've done your part, and then you can talk about everything else. You can talk about shopping, you can talk about the weather, you can talk about books that you're reading, but not that. And I just had something else I wanted to say, and I can't remember what it was. Oh, regarding pregnancy announcements. I think this is a really important one. Sorry. When somebody has to share the news that they're pregnant with a friend who's going through infertility, personally, I've always found that, I know there's different opinions on this. Some people like phone calls, but doing it through text is the best way because it gives your friend, relative, whoever it is, the distance to read that text, go, cry if they have to, collapse if they have to, just like feel sucker punched to the stomach, whatever it is that they have to feel, or have to ignore it because they have to move on to their day, and then get back to you when they have the time. And don't do it in a cute way because it's not going to feel cute to them. And that doesn't mean that they don't, God forbid, feel so happy for you and so, and are so, and still love you and support you. But this is something that they're really struggling with. So the cuteness is not gonna come across as cute. It's just gonna come across as tacky, as and not thoughtful. So definitely just be upfront. Do it through text if you can, unless you're somebody that speaks to them on the phone often, then maybe. But really, I would say through text is always safest. And the last thing that I would say, shoot, I just lost my train of thought again. It was an important one.
I was going to say, I fully 1000% agree with that. Text is always, I always advise people the text is the best way to do it because, as you said, it gives people a chance to react on their own terms. And then they can come back to you when they're ready and wish you Mazel Tov, B'Sha'ah Tova, congratulations, whatever it is. Or when you have the baby also, same thing. It just gives them a chance to sit with their emotions and not have to just immediately like give you that false, oh my God, that's so amazing.
Right.
And then like go into their car and like cry for 12 hours. Like it gives people the space that they need. So
yeah. And the other thing that I would say it through text, say it directly. And the other thing that I would say is tell them as early as you feel comfortable. And I know that in, the Orthodox world, there's often, and even not, there's a lot of people, feel uncomfortable or feel more comfortable keeping their pregnancy news private. And I know in the Chabad world, there's a tradition not to even share publicly until, let's say, until the 5th month. But the friends and family who have told me early, and again, that's about like publicizing, you know, like making baby announcements, people who have told me earlier than they would normally tell, you know, like I've had friends who have told me even before their entire, like extended family knew, you know, like people have told me earlier than I would expect to be told. Just it meant that they recognized that their news was going to cause me pain and that they appreciated that they could do something to lessen that pain. So I think that that is a sensitivity that's really appreciated across the board. It's also something people will often like delay sharing a pregnancy news because it's scary. They don't know how the person's going to react or they don't know how to share it. So they delay. And what ends up happening is that their friend finds out through the grapevine by seeing them, and it's so much more painful. So it's always a better idea to be upfront and to be early and just do it through text and give everybody the space that they need. I think that's
absolutely. Absolutely. Before we wind down, I'm going to just ask one more question. If anybody has any questions for Esty,
yeah, that's a good one.
Please, yeah. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, please drop them in the comment box. And we have a little bit more time. We have about
I can talk
10 more
fast.
minutes. Yeah, you saw she just talked really fast, and it was like 50 minutes. So she can talk really fast. So if anybody has any more questions, we'll try to get to them. Let's do one more, being that you're talking so fast, if nobody answers. Okay, I guess the question is like, you know, how do you talk to, someone said, how do you talk to or be sensitive to acquaintances who are going through infertility? Like someone that you are like not so close to, but still sort of know about, like, do you, based on the fact that like, you know, you're not giving advice, you're not this, we know already like what you're not supposed to do. Like, do you even have that conversation or do you not?
Well, I think the question again is like, why do you know that they're, meaning if you know enough that they're going through infertility to know that you need to be sensitive to it, then, but they're just an acquaintance, be sensitive in the place that you know. Like, let's say if it's in the workplace, if it's obvious to you that this person is really trying to have children, because not everybody is, just by the way, but if it's obvious to you that this person is really trying to have children and is struggling with that, you don't need to, again, like you can be a supportive friend or acquaintance in that you're open if they decide to speak, but it's also just always good to be extra sensitive on your own, you know? So maybe don't talk about, you know, when you're talking about your weekend plans, let's just say this is an office situation, you know, don't talk about the parts that don't involve all of your kids' plans, you know, because we all have parts in our lives that are common threads. So, you know, talk about whatever it is that you can, you know, if it's 4th of July, talk about your 4th of July barbecue. You don't necessarily have to talk about your kids' sleepover, if that makes sense. So I think that's just being sensitive. And it sounds like she's already sensitive. She's aware of that is kind of a good start.
Amazing. Yes, somebody is just commenting about how her sister, when she was pregnant, didn't share the news with her. She shared it with the entire family, and she found out much later, and that was very hurtful. Yeah, I hear.
I'm sorry, it is really hurtful.
Yeah, it is hurtful, and I've heard this story over and over and over again. People telling me things like this, and Esty's advice is exactly right. Share as early as you can, and make sure you don't hear that you're sharing it directly with them and not with other people, so that the person can find out. Okay, look, I don't want to stretch this out longer than it needs to, and I feel like we covered so much ground, and I know that I've already had messages of people asking me whether this is going to be saved. Yes, it will be saved. It's going to go directly to IGTV. I'm still working on some technical issues to move things over to YouTube where the rest of the Insta Lives are, but hopefully it will get there as well, but it will be saved. And
can I just touch on 2 more questions really quick?
Please. Go.
Okay, so one is practical, so it's a quick answer. Somebody asked, do you suggest a fertility test before marriage? Unfortunately, there isn't one magical fertility test. There are like hundreds of fertility tests. Some are less invasive, like a blood test, and some are much more invasive. So no, there's no reason to test or worry about your fertility unless you already have a reason to worry. You know about something, but I do suggest doing genetic testing always before a Jewish couple gets married, because we Jews have lots of genetic predispositions to lots of genetic problems. That's one thing. But the second thing I want to talk about, somebody said, what did I find? Oh, keeping Emunah when it feels hard, hurtful. And I just wanted to kind of end on that note, how to keep kind of trusting and believing in God when it feels like God isn't really pulling through for you. I think I've weirdly found God or Hashem a lot through infertility, because it's just so incredibly obvious that he's in control, like things that make no sense, literally. I think for anybody in the infertility world, like somebody can have horrible numbers or horrible stats and then come out with a great pregnancy, and somebody can have great numbers and then nothing will happen. Like God is an obvious third partner in this, in this kind of creation of a child with all the other medical partners. So I think that finding God in infertility is easy. Liking him is maybe a little less. And I think it's okay to be upset with God, and to say this hurts and I want this to end. And this is not how I envisioned my life going. And I think after all that, and I think that, being real in that relationship with Hashem and saying, this hurts, like I don't approve of this plan, is important. And then I think at the end of the day, recognizing when you're up to it, nobody should ever tell this to somebody else, but recognizing that somewhere, somehow God has a plan. And even if it seems impossible to see now, at the end of the day, at some point, you're going to find it. So I think that's that.
Yeah, I yes, 1,000%. It's he is definitely very much the third party in all this, and we know. I mean, this whole world has been upended over the last number of months, and it's proved we in the fertility community or the infertility community always knew that we were not in control, and now everybody else also knows that we are not in control. But it's hard, and those emotions of pain and suffering and it not being fair and seeing so many other people having the things that we also want is it's very hard. It's very hard. Okay. All right, Esty. I'm incredibly grateful, even through your nerves, which I didn't see and I'm sure nobody else saw either. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing all of your wisdom through your journey with all of us, because there's so many people who are going through this, and you are a voice of sanity and experience, unfortunately, and you have this beautiful way of just telling it as it is. So I'm grateful, and I know everyone else is grateful also. So
thank you so much. And just a quick thank you to Amy. And like I said earlier about finding an infertility buddy, I know that Amy doesn't need more people to support because she's already supporting thousands of people. But Amy is like that infertility, but like a universal infertility buddy. And I've had times when I didn't have any current infertility buddies that I had to text something frustrating to, and I would literally just text Amy, and she had all the right things to say. So if you ever need a shoulder to lean on, I'm happy to be there for you, but I think Amy has much stronger shoulders. So her page is wonderful and her support is even more. And thank you everybody for being here, because this was really nice.
You know what? The bottom line is, unfortunately, we each have a chelek here, right? We each have a piece here, and we each need to do our part to help to support the community. And so I'm grateful to be able to do the small part that I am. But thank you, everybody. Good night. Again, this will be saved on IGTV and hopefully will be saved shortly on YouTube. Okay, thank you
Thanks
so much.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.